I'd like to talk to you about traditional gear identification and consideration for purchase. This presentation will not cover how to place rock climbing gear. It's going to focus on the different names of the gear and some of the parts, and then what to think about when you're buying your first climbing rack. I'm going to start with talking about the difference between removable gear and trad gear. So removable gear is the really umbrella term for clean gear. Gear that is placed in the rock on lead, does not do any damage to the rock, and is removed during the climb. Things like wedges, chocks, hexes, and tri-cams, spring-loaded camming devices. These are all removable gear. Traditional climbing, or what we call trad climbing, includes pitons, but we don't usually talk about that. When we're talking about trad climbing, we're usually talking about removable gear and clean climbing. I'm going to do another presentation on the history of climbing, where we're talking about Roy Robbins and Yvon Chouinard and how they created the philosophy and ethic of clean climbing. But right now I'm going to focus on the different types of gear that you want to consider for buying your first trad rack. So slings, often forgotten about, but can be used quite often to sling chicken heads, or you can sling chalk stones or horns. It's very inexpensive and can get you out of a tight space if other types of gear wouldn't fit. So for example, if you look at this, let's see here if I can get this, this one here, obviously it's slung through a chalk stone, but there's not a lot of other places to place gear, and this gives you a chance to protect yourself and not use your other types of protection, the other types of removable gear. So there's two big categories of trad gear. There's passive gear, which just simply means that the shape of the gear fits into a constriction in the rock. There's no rotational force. Passive gear includes chocks and wedges, hexes, tri-cams. This one here, I've never used these, but it's just an example of one type of wedge. Wedges is the general term, but often the word stopper is used. That's Black Diamond's name brand. DMM walnuts, Wild Country rocks, Trango nuts, chalkstones, which I think is a terrible name. This here, these over here are the DMM walnuts. I love the DMM walnuts. This is sizes, I think it's size 1 through 13 here. 1 through 11. Really don't need to worry too much about these smaller sizes. So, 1 through 5 isn't as critical when you're first buying a rack. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So considerations for purchase is that wedges have no moving parts. They're very durable. They're light, color-coded, anodized aluminum, and wired. $60 to $85. If you think about stoppers, size 4 through 13 or sizes 4 through 11 are fine. Depends on where you climb. So if you're climbing in an area where you feel like there's going to be a need for bigger stoppers, then buy a rack of stoppers that have the 12 and 13 in them. You need about 2 sets of them. I'm actually fond of the DMM walnuts. I think they're the best, but the Black Diamond stoppers are really good also. Hexes are often overlooked. They've kind of grown out of vogue. However, hexes are great for a beginner rack because they're very lightweight, they're very durable, and they cover a wide range of crack size because you can place them the width-wise along with the vertical wise. They can be placed passively or actively. I'm going to talk about placement in another presentation. I absolutely love tri-cams. This pink tri-cam has saved my life at least 3 times. They can be placed where nothing else works. They can be placed actively and they can be placed passively. I usually use them actively. They're very light, they're very durable, and actually fairly inexpensive. You can get a set of 4, $75, and I'd highly recommend those for your first trad rack. Here's an example of how a tri-cam is placed actively. So we have passive gear, excuse me, and we have active gear. At here, in this pink tri-cam, if the climber falls in this direction, the cam is going to be pulled, rotated this direction, and into the rock there. That's going to cause it to hold in place. So it's not necessarily the constriction of the rock that's holding an active piece of gear. It's the rotation of the piece of gear. So the tri-cam rotates. So hexes can be placed actively. I'm going to talk about that later in another presentation. Tri-cams can be placed actively. But typically when we think about active gear, we're talking about the spring-loaded camming devices. You can see here different parts of the camming device. This is an old rigid stem. So this is an old rigid stem it has the lobes, so the cam lobes are here. And most cams have 4 lobes. You can see the trigger is right there. The trigger has wires to the lobes so that you can pull the trigger back. The lobes decrease in size. You can place it in the crack, and then they increase in size. So there is a rotation force that occurs in order to hold the piece of gear in place. So you can see, and the spring-loaded camming devices rotate in order to hold the gear in place. So the anatomy of a spring-loaded camming device, you have the lobes, which I talked about, and the lobes are right there. They're not labeled on this diagram. You have the teeth that are on the lobes. You have the axle, which the lobes rotate on. You have the trigger cord. Sometimes that does get worn down and can be replaced, but the trigger cord goes to the trigger. That allows you to pull the lobes to make them smaller. You have, in this case, you have a flexible stem, and then you have the sling, which you attach, usually an alpine draw, but you can use a quick draw. Showing here, this is the U stem here. And this just allows you to pull the trigger, the thumb and forefinger only, versus with the single cable stem, you have to have your forefinger and your middle finger and your thumb all pulling the trigger at the same time. So some people like the U stem a little bit better. I typically use the single cable stem. You You can also buy these with extendable slings, which I personally don't use much just because I use alpine draws and I've not found it necessary to have an extendable sling. I really like the Black Diamond Camelots. This is the ultralight Camelot. It has a wide range, so it can be fit into different size cracks. The big advantage of all spring-loaded camming devices is that they fit into parallel cracks. So passive gear needs a constriction in the rock. So the rock needs to constrict to put in a nut, whereas a cam can be placed in a parallel crack with no constriction, and this really opens up the possibility of climbing in a wide range of areas. Spring-loaded camming devices are expensive. The number 1 and number 3 Camelots are from $100 to $120. There are now what are called link cams. This is just happens to be the Omega Pacific Link Cam 2 Cam. Again, really creative name. But basically it gives you even wider range because you can pull the trigger about halfway and place it like that, or you can pull the trigger the full way and place it in an even smaller crack. Comes with a very high price tag. 3-cam units or TCUs. I use these somewhat, but find that actual tri-cams work where these would also work, which is basically in pockets or very short cracks where 4 lobes wouldn't fit. The 3 units, some people feel like they don't walk as much. Some people feel like they walk out of the crack versus walking back in the crack. It's all about the placement. And I typically go with 4 lobes for my first rack. I wouldn't worry about your 3-cam units, unless there's a particular place that you're climbing that you think you really need TCUs. I just want to give you this example. This chart here shows in millimeters the different sizes. So you can see here, the Black Diamond Camelots. So I know that the red is the number 1 cam, has a range of millimeters of, so this looks like it's 30 millimeters to about 50. And that is, it's a perfect hand crack for me. This is the number 2 Camelot. This is the number 3. And I'm going to recommend at the end that you get also the 0.75 Camelot. So you're going to cover a range from just over 20 millimeters, which is finger cracks, all the way, went a little far there, but to just over 80 millimeters, which really gets you close to like a fist crack. So you're going to stay in this range depending on the width of your hand and fingers. So when you're considering buying cams, I don't think you need the ultralight to start, but the industry's kind of moved towards the ultralight. Buy the most common ranges, which is basically the finger crack to the... You don't have to worry about buying doubles at first unless you're climbing very long routes or you're climbing routes where the same size cam is needed over and over. So think about, the the area you're going to climb, and how many size cams you're going to need to protect yourself safely. You can see the price tag gets pretty high here, but cams last a long time. The textiles, which is right here, can be replaced, and the trigger wires also can be replaced pretty easily. You will need a nut tool. So if you look here, I'm recommending 2 sets of the DMM walnuts, just the sizes 7 through 11. It's $90, $45 per set, so a total of $90. 1 set of the Camp Tri-Cams is $75. 1 set of Black Diamond hexes is $90. The .75 to 3 Black Diamond Camelots to $430. You need some type of alpine draw. The Black Diamond Mini alpine draws about $10 a piece. That's $120. Metolius multi-loop gear sling. So I didn't talk a lot about the gear sling, but I think the gear sling is important for multi-pitch trad climbing, especially because then you can hand off the gear easier to your partner versus putting everything on your harness. I also like the loop gear sling, because then I can keep my rack organized, and then it gives me space to put my alpine draws or quick draws on my harness. The Black Diamond Oz carabiners are some lightweight carabiner for racking. So you can see here, you have to have a carabiner to hold the walnuts or the stoppers that you're buying. You need a nut tool, so the total runs you about $1,000. I'm going to talk about in another presentation my journey in trad climbing, and just talk about how you can start off by following somebody else that has trad gear, and then just start accumulating little pieces of gear over a length of time to spread out the cost and make it more reasonable. Awesome. Good luck in buying trad gear. It's a awesome journey. It's been worth every cent and beyond to purchase this gear and then be able to know how to use it. Thanks a bunch. See ya.